All right, so there's a lot to unpack over the last 12 hours. We had the FOMC rate decision. We also had major earnings. We had the Trump meeting with China, and the crypto market reaction has been mixed, same as equities. So I want to unpack exactly what happened and what we can look forward to in the future. I also want to answer the question of why crypto has been underperforming. This is a question that a lot of people are wondering. If you go into the stock market, overall, the stock market looks significantly better, especially on the weekly and the monthly time frame, than crypto. If you look at crypto on the weekly and the monthly time frame, it doesn't look as good apart from select narratives like, ZEC, Pump, and Aero, which have been leading the rest of the market. The majority of altcoins are down. So I want to discuss why that's happening because there is a reason. In fact, it's a multi-pronged reason. 3 different variables that are negatively impacting crypto that aren't impacting equities. And I want to discuss how that could be flipping very, very soon. So it's going to be an alpha-packed show. I want to update you on everything from yesterday's update. Overall, I think things played out pretty in line with what I thought, but we'll unpack the nuance and I'll give you an update on my trades and all that sort of thing as well. So make sure to subscribe for these updates. Also, at the end of the video, I'm going to give you the alpha on the sector that I think is going to outperform in terms of altcoins. So if I was focusing on the market right now, if I was on-chain trenching, if I was researching, that is the sector that I would be focusing on because I think it has the most potential. There are a couple of gems and there's one major that I think is at a good accumulation zone right now that I've been adding to my position, and we'll go through that at the end of the show. But first, we have to go over what is happening with the market overall. And obviously, yesterday was FOMC day. Powell's comments overall were pretty expected. I think the only thing that slightly surprised markets, and is why we saw a bit of an iffy reaction with the stock market dropping 1% at one point in the session, was the fact that Jerome Powell said that the December rate cut is far from certain. So he didn't come out and guarantee a cut in December. I think everyone still expects that there's going to be a further rate cut. That's what the probabilities are suggesting. However, there does seem to be a little bit of growing division amongst the Fed as to what the right path going forward is. He did say he wasn't worried about the labor market, so I think that softened things a little bit. But it was interesting to see the stock market reaction because at one point in the session, we were down all the way, I think 1.2% on the NASDAQ. So it ended up recovering towards the end of the session to end the day flat to down. Futures are pointing slightly down. We'll go into my trades and stuff from yesterday's video and talk about what is happening there. So I think the theory of the fact that the market had priced things in was correct, and any sort of hiccup was going to result in the markets potentially sneezing was correct. What kind of saved the market towards the end of the session, if you go into the 1 hour, this becomes more clear, and saw the market getting a little bit of a boost towards the end of the day, was the earnings data. So earnings overall for a lot of the major companies were pretty good. So Microsoft, marginally surprised. We saw some uptick there in price. We saw Google performing well as well, up 26% versus the expectation. Meta underperformed expectations. Its profit was actually pretty good, but some of its expenses had the market questioning its viability, so that's why it dropped a little bit. And then going down the list, we had some beats, we had some misses, but overall, I think earnings were received pretty well by the market, and that's why you did see the market react well to earnings, but it started to give back a bit of its gains now, primarily because of what I said yesterday. The majority of this positive news, that FOMC would deliver a rate cut, which it did, that Trump and Xi Jinping would reach a trade deal, which they kind of did. I mean, most of it was positive. There were a number of agreements, as you can see in front of you, met between the two parties. All of this, I think, was already factored into the market, alongside the fact that earnings would be strong, although Microsoft and Google still went above the expectations, despite some companies like Meta going below the expectations. If you look at some of the earnings that are yet to come, we still have Apple and Amazon today, so it's going to be continued volatility across markets. Markets are also expecting earnings to be good here, but if there are any hiccups, once again, because I do think things are relatively priced in for now until there is the next major narrative in the market, you could maybe see a bit of volatility on the NASDAQ. So my hedge short position is still open. It's still marginally up. So I opened it around here the day before. I updated you on the show when I did it. It was well in profit at one point. I was printing, and then we saw the impulse up. Trade stayed open, and I'm holding it into today's session because the thesis is not done. As you guys would have seen in the video yesterday, it's all about the earnings and the fact that things are priced in. I said that Bitcoin yesterday should hold up relatively well, and it could end up being buy the news. There still isn't a technical trigger for me to buy here. In fact, I'm more focused on specific altcoin setups, which we'll discuss some later in the video. But what did happen throughout the daily session is that it did hold up versus daily open. So we did see at one point it dropped a lot to 108.1, started to scare people. We also saw a whipsaw to the upside this morning to 111.6, and now it's settling back on the daily at around 110.5. So Bitcoin just shopping, didn't drop, kind of maintained, and that goes towards the thesis that I also discussed yesterday, that the majority of downside was already priced into the market prior to the FOMC. That's often what you see with these events. You see the market selling off or de-risking prior to the event, and then sometimes you even see a bounce during the event. We did see a slight bounce, but overall it was just a whipsaw, and we haven't seen continuation to the upside. So I'll be watching the Bitcoin chart closely. The Asia session today has brought Bitcoin up marginally higher. It did open, I think, at 109, went down a little bit more at open, and then went up 2.3% intraday. So Bitcoin looks okay, but I think slight stock market weakness in the futures has caused a little bit of pressure or headwinds on overall risk assets, and that's why you are seeing Bitcoin relatively flat for the day. So my update yesterday, nothing has really changed in terms of my thesis. In fact, I think things played out largely in line with that, but we do, of course, have more earnings today. So that is what we are going to have to keep our eye on today. So I think that leads us to the question of what's next. We've had FOMC, we've had some sort of deal between Trump and China. We've had most of the earnings, even though there's a couple more to go. What's next? Well, now, I'm not going to dig too deep into macro stuff today. We can do that in a future video. So we can go into rate cuts. We can go into all of that stuff. I think that's boring. I think you guys kind of know where the macro situation sits at the moment. The Fed is going to be ending, as they announced yesterday, QT on December 1st, slightly later than people expected as well. I think that put a bit of pressure on the market, but it's okay. It's still going to be coming to an end. They're going to be implementing a form of soft QE, kind of disguised QE. That bodes well for markets. Rate cuts bode well for markets. But why isn't Bitcoin pumping in line with equities? I think that's the question a lot of people are asking right now. Like, if you do look at the daily for the NASDAQ, although we have seen a bit of weakness over the last day or so since the high, overall it's still, majorly up. And if you look at Bitcoin on the weekly chart, overall it's looking a little bit weaker. Like, it hasn't broken out to new highs. It made a high, it looked really strong, and then it's just been stalling and chopping. So what's actually happening? Well, I want to unpack a few of the variables right now so you actually understand what is happening in the market that is suppressing crypto relative to equities. Understanding these also help you get an understanding of how the path to a reversal trade could potentially pave itself. Firstly, we got to look at the ETF flows. You can see that ETFs have been net sellers. Now, I don't, buy this whole, BlackRock is selling thing that, a lot of people push on X. In reality, BlackRock is just a fund, and these ETFs are mainly comprised of retail. Yes, there's some institutional interest, but a lot of it is retail. So overall, retail have been driving a lot of the sales that have resulted in negative flows out of the ETFs, and this has put a bit of pressure on the market. The other thing that's put pressure on the market is a lot of the OG whales have actually started selling. Now, they've been selling all year. These are people that bought Bitcoin in 2010, 2011, and have been offloading into, Trump, have been offloading into Michael Saylor. But we have recently seen a lot of the dormant wallets beginning to wake up. Some of the wallets are speculated to be in Asia, because that is when we've seen a lot of the sell pressure. And these wallets, they're a little bit opaque. Like, what they do is they become active after years of being dormant, and then they distribute into hundreds of other wallets, and then they siphon off across multiple exchanges. It's very hard to track on chain, but what you can see is that the long-term holders, and this gives us a bit of an idea as to what's happening, have started to shift from bullish territory to bearish territory, aka they have become net sellers, and this is the data from Glassnode, which backs this up. So it's not only the intraday, session selling that we're seeing coming out of Asia, and we're not only seeing dormant wallets starting to wake up, we're also seeing this reflecting in the on-chain data. So that, alongside the ETF selling, has been two reasons why Bitcoin's been suppressed. Now, this isn't dumping, causing Bitcoin to nuke, it's just been suppressing it. So it just helps us build the picture of why equities can be making new highs and Bitcoin is still seeming relatively suppressed. And there's a bunch of data which you can go into as well, which look at this, as well as looking into the DAT holdings and the spot ETF holdings as well. The DAT holdings are a very interesting piece of the puzzle here as well, because it's not only the ETF selling and the long-term holders selling, it also the DATs are selling. So there's been a couple of DATs which have started to offload because their price, their MNAV, is significantly lower. So the amount of Bitcoin that they hold versus their stock price has ticked into negative territory. So they're actually at a discount to their holdings, which obviously is not very good for the business models here, because in order for a treasury company to succeed, they need to have prolonged periods where they're positive MNAV so they can raise. These companies can't raise if they have a negative NAV, so they can't actually expand. When you have a negative NAV, what you potentially need to start doing is actually offloading or selling some of your assets in order to buy back shares to help you get into positive NAV territory. The reason why a lot of these are negative is because the hype for these treasury companies has deteriorated over the past couple of months. In August, June, July, it was really hot. Then we saw the ETH wave, and now it's becoming not so hot again. And a lot of these are now trading below premium. There is even rumors that MicroStrategy, who do have a positive NAV, may potentially have to start selling. But this is right now just a rumor, because the polymarket odds are suggesting a probability of 4 to 5%, which is still not very high at all. But we have started to see some DATs experiencing some weakness. Some DATs have started to sell, especially the ones that are under a lot of pressure. And this has just put a tad more sell pressure on the market and has been a little bit of a headwind for Bitcoin. You know, the DAT trades were one of the big reasons why Bitcoin is pumped so much. And if you actually look at it in entirety, Bitcoin is still heavily outperformed the NASDAQ from the bear market lows. It's still outperformed the NASDAQ over the past couple of years. But the fact that the Treasury trade helped Bitcoin get this powerful final leg, it's also reflective in the sense that it's also what's causing weakness right now. So you can't have one without the other. It was obviously a big catalyst, and it still can be in the future if the narrative comes back again, but it is working against Bitcoin and against Ethereum right now, and that's why you are seeing a little bit of weakness. I'm painting this picture to help you, so you're not just sitting back going, why isn't crypto pumping? Like, you have to understand there are specific supply side factors here which are impacting crypto, which are not as relevant for equities, because equities, they're largely propped up by earnings. Crypto is largely propped up by flows. So you have to look at the market differently. Bitcoin is a flows game. Altcoins are a flows game because they aren't revenue generating assets, or at least most of them are. You have to look at whether there's net inflows or net outflows in order to work out how price is going to trade. One way that you can actually track this that I like, obviously there's a Blockwork scanner here, but I like the DeFi Llama scanner. You can look at their DAT, so digital asset treasury page, and you can work out the MNAV and the NAV of each company on the market, and you can click onto each company and see how much they're accumulating, how much they're purchasing. Are they actually unwinding? So are you starting to see the amount that they're holding going down, or are you seeing it continue to increase? The Blockwork scanner is also very good for this as well. Now, there's another silent factor. Before I get into my overall summary and where I think things are going to go, there's one more silent factor which a lot of people aren't talking about or addressing, and it's October 10th. Now, I could rant and rave about October 10th and how it hurt sentiment in crypto, and how, a lot of market makers blew out, and how a lot of people are now scared to take on leverage, and we've seen an OI drop and all of that stuff. But one thing that is affecting markets right now, and it's going to be a headwind on altcoins, I think, for a matter of weeks or months, and I said this at the time, is the fact that a lot of market makers are still being forced to slowly offload positioning. We've seen some market making firms come back to the market. You can see this tweet here is saying that there is a bad market making firm returning to the order books after the October 10th blowout. Binance lost them a chunk of their portfolio with unfair ADLs. Now they have to make it back by dumping supply into their own shorts. Worse for crypto than pump fun. So there are market makers right now who are offloading supply, which are putting pressure on certain altcoins, and that is hurting the market a lot. So there are a few notorious ones in the market at the moment which are putting pressure on the market. And if you go into X, you can research this further and look into the dynamics at play. But this is putting a lot of pressure on the altcoin market specifically. So you have a few headwinds for Bitcoin, the ETFs, the DATs, and then for altcoins, you have market makers which are still offloading, combined with the fact that obviously, the risk premium for these assets has reduced because people are a little bit worried after the October 10th blowout. Needless to say, all of this stuff, all of this shenanigans, all of this panic, and all of this uncertainty is happening in a big range for Bitcoin. So if you really just want to simplify things for Bitcoin, and Bitcoin's going to lead the alts. I think we all know, balance of probabilities, dominance has to go up a little bit more before we see a bigger alt season. At least that's my opinion. I'm looking at dominance here. Yes, it did drop a little bit, but overall this is an uptrend. I think this resolves in higher highs for dominance before we do get a leg to the downside. Even if it's not a higher high, maybe it is at least a retest of these highs, and we get a double top forming before dominance comes down, and you see altcoins beginning to run. So I think dominance needs to move higher. So if that is your thesis, I don't know, other people in the market are also in that same camp, like Cowan, for example, then Bitcoin will probably need to break higher to put in a top for dominance before there's a bigger rotation and we get that ETH run like we did a couple of months ago. So looking at Bitcoin right now is probably the most important thing. And if you really want to chart Bitcoin simply, you can just draw in your levels on the monthly. So we have your monthly high, you have your monthly low, and a lot of the stuff that's happening in between is just noise. I mean, it's easier to jump on the H4, right? And look at like, oh, you know, we're getting a breakout, so this could be a market structure shift to the upside. Oh, but now we're getting a fake out, so this is a shift to the downside, and we're sweeping liquidity on the local low. Or, you know, oh, we've broke, you know, we were knocking on the H4 noodle and we've gotten above, so you should long. And yes, this is great for intraday traders. Maybe you can take some swing trades, but if you're positioning, you know, midterm, and I think most of my best trades have been mid to long-term trades, you're going to get more clarity probably looking at the monthly chart and the weekly chart. And what the monthly chart and the weekly chart are telling us is that we are currently in a big range. So if you move down to the weekly, you can see the monthly high and the monthly low are the two major levels right now for Bitcoin. If we started breaking below the monthly low, I'd start to get a bit worried, and there's also confluence with the weekly money noodle and the daily as well, that we could potentially go lower, and then you can maybe even start talking about, you know, the Bitcoin bull run being over, the trend being completely over. But until then, this would be a buying zone. This would be a great buying zone with inval below. Conversely, if you want to get all excited about altcoins and about the market, you would be waiting for a Bitcoin breakout of the range high. That's 126K. Now, yes, of course, there's going to be some intra-range positioning that you can take on alts to take advantage of this first swing on Bitcoin, which is 13%. But remember, Bitcoin needs to make a new high before we see that rotation. Dominance needs to go higher, in my opinion, before we see that rotation to the rest of the market. So if that's the case, then you probably still will have ample time to position on a breakout. So don't be completely freaked out. And I do see this in the Discord and the Telegram, my X sometimes, like, and the YouTube comments, like people asking, oh, but the market's pumping, like, is it too late to position? Like, should I be buying now? Because if Bitcoin does go to new highs, then I should buy now, right? Because then, look, here's the thing. You can and you should, I mean, not financial advice, but if you want exposure to the market, you should build a portfolio that reflects that. However, risk management is still an important thing. And typically, the closer to an extremity, and right now we're in the middle of a range, but the closer to an extremity of a range, the better your risk reward on a trade. And for Bitcoin, that's like 103, range low, and the high breakout would be 125. The other thing is, you'll probably have ample time to position in altcoin trades and rotations when Bitcoin breaks out. So let's say hypothetically, you don't allocate to altcoins at all. And I know a lot of you are, and I am as well, but let's just say hypothetically, you aren't. Bitcoin breaks out, it goes higher, it goes to 140. Like, can you imagine in this phase here how much craziness will be happening in the altcoin market? It won't be hard to spot the outliers in the market once Bitcoin begins to make its next parabolic move to the upside. So you don't need to feel panicked to be constantly in massive spot positions and have all this exposure and constantly trade every H4 or H1 move in order to get exposure. You can be a little more patient, wait for a breakout, and then you can trade the rotation game on alts and make a lot of money if you are in the right altcoins. So what I want to do now is actually look into what some of those altcoins could be throughout the next period when Bitcoin makes a move, because I think there are some clear narratives right now which are standing out. I'm not going to go through 10 narratives. That's going to be a show that I'm probably going to do over the next week at some point. I'm going to do an ultimate deep dive into crypto narratives. So make sure you're subscribed, notifications turned on. We're going to go through all the major ones and go through coins from each. But today I want to focus on the main one. And the main one for me is probably going to be AI. And that is because X402, I think, has materially changed the game for AI. We needed a tailwind for crypto. And this tailwind came in the form of new technology, which facilitates agent-to-agent transfers. And Coinbase has backed this and are actively supporting this. So I think a lot of the infrastructure being built around this can be really nice stuff to trade, look at, research, and get into over the next period in the market. Now, I will say this. Not all of the proxies are super obvious right now. So I think this is a longer term play that we are genuinely going to see some agent-to-agent traction happening in crypto. So real payments are going to be used with agents. Real DeFi is going to be used with agents. All the bets that I'm making are keeping the longer term vision in mind. Now, yes, I might trade some in the short term. There are some interesting swing trades. There are some interesting narrative trades. But I think the bigger profits and the lower risk trades are going to come with a slightly longer belief that this can actually impact the crypto market. And I think it definitely can. And I've been a believer, for a long period of time that the biggest opportunity heading into the next few years in crypto is AI. And if you looked at A16Z's State of Crypto report, which they just released, they specifically mentioned X402 as a narrative that can hit $30 trillion in autonomous transaction value by 2030. If this is the case, then the vision for this and the upside for this is a lot longer term than the next few months. But markets are efficient, and if Bitcoin starts running, they will start pricing this in ahead of time. And that's where you could still see parabolic gains in this sector over the next 6 months, even if you don't have to wait years for the potential targets here to formally materialize. I think it's very exciting. This was a great post by Sammy, which breaks down this stuff. I highly recommend looking into it. You can just search his handle on X, S4MMY, and then search X402. This should come up. Research it. What I'm going to do right now for you is give you a bit of an overview as to the websites I'm looking at to track this stuff and research this stuff, and a few of the coins that I'm currently looking at that I've either invested in or I'm watching or eyeing. So firstly, a dashboard that just became live is the X402 dashboard. This actually shows you how many transactions are happening with the X402 payment standard. So, this whole trillions of transactions thesis, you need to actually be tracking this regularly to see whether the narrative is growing or whether it's shrinking. Now, there's only been a few days since it's gone live, but you can use this June dashboard for X402 to look at weekly transactions and weekly value moved. So far, it's about $1 million yesterday, transaction counts of 921,000 and 55,000 unique buyers and sellers. I want to see material traction over this over the next few weeks, and the data will impact how I position. Because as I said, this could be a longer term thing that I actually want to see some traction for, even though in the short term there are some interesting trading opportunities. In order to track some of the coins under the X402 narrative, and if you sign into this, you get even more features and functionality, but I'm on my other computer right now. You can see the cookie dashboard here has all of the agents, and you can toggle from agents, infrastructure, and DeFi AI. All of these agents, well, not all of them, but a lot of them are going to be implementing X402. Obviously, there are some old ones which are not completely relevant, but a lot of these are obviously going to want to find the most efficient way to transfer payments, and that is going to be through the new standard from Coinbase. So, especially the ones in the base ecosystem, I think these are the most interesting. Obviously, if you go into all networks, you can look across, BSC. I think the two chains right now, which are the hottest overall for on-chain, and I said in yesterday's video, if you were looking for something to do in a market that's a little bit boring, with Bitcoin in this range, I would just be diving deep into AI specifically, and then the hottest ecosystems on-chain. And right now, that's Base, and that is BSC. At the very end of the video, I've got a new coin on Binance that hasn't launched yet that could be the leader on the chain for X402, which isn't on this list but will be once it launches. But this is a great screener to get information on this stuff and research stuff further, because if you want to research something, you can click on it, for example, ALCH, using a random example here, and then you can check out its social score, its mindshare, and you can obviously, once you log in, start to see holder distribution, whale accumulation trend. This is very good because you can see whether smart money is accumulating. I'll log in next time and actually show you how to use this. It's very, very cool. You can see the top holdings, balance by holding, and this can show you whether whales are still accumulating or are offloading. Obviously, as we discussed before, flows are the number one thing in crypto right now. So in light of this Base and BSC discussion, let's talk about some of the altcoins on these networks, which are interesting from an X402 perspective. So the coin I mentioned before that hasn't launched yet, but could be one of the leaders on Binance for the agent or X402 payment narrative is Piverse. So Piverse is facilitating gasless payments with X402, timestamping value through on-chain invoices, receipts, and checks. The very interesting thing about this one is that it's one of the only projects in this narrative that is followed by CZ. So if you go onto their follower list, you can go down and you can see it's followed by CZ. I think this is very important because he drove the narrative for Asta, which was the top performing DEX a couple of weeks ago. This could be an interesting one to watch if there is more affiliation there. We do know as well that it had a Binance wallet pre-TGE listing, this likely leads to a potential Binance listing. So if this is listed on Binance, clearly it's going to be one of the main proxies, because right now there aren't many ways to get exposure to the narrative on BSC or on base. So if this launches as a flagship, then it's probably going to have a lot of mindshare, attention, and trading volume. Now, of course, I can't tell you where it's going to launch. I have an early investment in one of the investment rounds, but when it launches, that will dictate what I do from a liquid perspective. So obviously, my investment has extremely long vesting. I'll still be looking to get liquid exposure, so I actually benefit in the short term, because if you're a VC or if you're a creator and you invest in these early rounds, often you have like a 1-year lock or a multi-month lock, and this narrative could pop off in the next 6 to 12 months. So even though I have that position, I'm still very interested in accumulating on the liquid market, and that's something I'll update you when the time comes. But these narratives, they aren't all about making moves and buying straight away. They're about looking at the right things, and hopefully I can do this through my content, making sure you're focused on the right things, following the right things, and just paying attention. So, following these sort of projects, paying attention, watching these videos, and getting ideas is how you can actually extract alpha in a market like this. Because I don't think we're sitting in a market right now, it's extremely nascent, where you want to be, aping dozens of these protocols, but being aware of what's happening, which you are now, and diving deeper into things and looking for new plays, that is the best way to play the market. Remaining curious. It's in business, in life, but especially in crypto, remaining curious is going to be the number one thing which is going to make you money in this market. So that is one to watch. Another one to watch, this is a much more established project where I do have liquid exposure right now, is Eigen. They actually allow you to spin up and deploy custom X402 agents in less than 5 minutes. And they've been one of the oldest projects that have had infrastructure for this. And then as soon as we had the X402 launch, they obviously started facilitating this on-chain. And there's an interesting setup right now, and I do like these setups across the market overall, where you're into a big key psychological and high time frame level, which is the $1 level. You have clear invalidation below, but structurally, this is one that is interesting because it's come down to a major level. We're getting a retest. Risk reward here is decent because obviously you can cut below if it goes below and have some sort of invalidation clause in this zone, but then also the upside is like a 2x to its recent local high. In terms of majors, it's probably the one that I'm most interested in terms of this narrative. The other ones you have available in the market are virtuals, but it's run up a lot. That's the only reason why I don't like the chart at the moment. And there are a couple others as well, like Tibber, etc. on base. But for me, Eigen is the best risk reward in terms of buying. But that's obviously in terms of majors. I think a lot of the opportunity will also be on the lower cap stuff, which you got to keep an eye out for. Another lower cap that I added recently, I think I mentioned it in a video last week, is Coral Protocol. This is high risk, so obviously do your own research. Don't just ape this blindly, but I took a small position because they're also building great tech in the AI agent space. The price action's also been fairly good. Like if you go into the monthly chart, it's held up really well. Most other stuff's making lower lows. It's holding well, so that at least, you don't know everything in terms of flows with altcoins, but at least that highlights to me that the flows are solid, or at least there's, not a lot of whales just dumping and extracting. I like that. Of course, things can change in crypto at any time, but that's the information we have. Their team's also docs and stuff, which helps a lot as well. But there's a very interesting synergy here with X402 because, as you can see, you can run companies with X402, and you can use Coral to unlock the potential of these agents, which helps developers build these businesses faster. So the protocol allows you to rent agents, connect them through Coral, and empower them to transact through X402. And you can see the graph as to how it actually works with the Coral-powered agents. So this is very cool, and it's another one that is tied into the X402 narrative as well. So that's probably the other one I wanted to highlight today that I have exposure to, and the rest I'm just researching, waiting. I'm going to be looking at this launch. Hopefully there's a buying opportunity. Sometimes with these launches, you might see a little bit of selling day one, giving you the opportunity to get in. There was a similar setup on yield basis recently, so potentially there'll be a setup there and I'll keep you updated. So make sure to subscribe because I think TG is next week if I'm not mistaken. And hopefully this video was able to help you understand the dynamics at play with the overall market. Hopefully you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you in a couple of days. Probably no video tomorrow, or probably release an evergreen on Crypto Edge, which is my second channel just for crypto frameworks and mindset. So leave a link in the description below as well if you want to subscribe to that, because I'll see you over there. And have a lovely rest of your day. Peace out.